بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين آمين والحمد لله رب العالمين أما بعد. Today, inshallah, we're carrying on with the obligatory acts of salah. Before we talked about the conditions and the arkan. The conditions are the things that you have to do before the salah starts, and the arkan are the things you do during salah, so the different parts of the salah. Now, there are other obligatory integrals of the prayer which don't fit into these two categories. The other obligatory integrals include to perform the obligatory integrals whilst awake. So if you're someone who sleepwalks or you're praying while sleeping somehow, that's not valid. Not to precede the imam in any integral such that one does not simultaneously partake in a part of it with the imam. So what that is saying is not to pray faster than the imam. So what is the ruling for this? It's so much so that you go into ruku and then you get up before the imam has even gotten to ruku. Okay? But if you go into ruku before the imam and then the imam goes into ruku and you're still in ruku, because you're both together in ruku, we say the salah is valid. However, you're obviously mistaken for praying faster than the imam. Not to abort the prayer, to move from one integral to perform the following one. So you can't do ruku and sajda in the same position. You can't do two sajdas in the same position. You have to get up from the first sajda to do the second sajda. In one's opinion, the imam's prayer is valid. For whatever reason, if you believe the imam's prayer is invalid, then you are not able to pray behind that imam. The one's heels are not ahead of the imam's heels. Obviously, imam needs to be in front. And that goes for even if you are above the imam in terms of you're on an upper floor or you're in another room. Okay? You have to make sure you know where the imam is and always stand back from where the imam is. So even if you're on a top floor, let's say there's a men's side and a women's side, the women's side should know where the imam stands and they should not stand in front of the imam. Same goes for if there's an adjacent room, there needs to be a line, a red line or some tape that says this is where the imam stands, everyone else stand behind this line. When using personal reasoning, also pay attention to the fact that it says heels over here. Okay? Because sometimes the imam is someone who's short and the person praying next to him is someone who's tall. So as long as their heels aren't in line or the followers' heels aren't in front of the imams, then it doesn't matter if the person next to the imam, when they go into sajda, he's ahead of the imam because he's taller, right? That doesn't matter. We look at the heels. As long as the heels don't come to the same line or past the imam's heels, then it's still accepted. When using personal reasoning to determine the direction of prayer to the best of one's knowledge known to one during the prayer, we don't care about what happens after the prayer. So during the prayer, one did not face a different direction to the imam. So you've tried to figure out as best as possible where the qibla is, and you've started praying towards there with the imam. For whatever reason, if you face a different direction from the imam, then you have to repeat that prayer. If one does not learn of this difference except after completion of the prayer is valid. So we don't really care what happens after the prayer. As long as during the prayer you don't realize that you're praying to a different direction than the imam, that's fine. Now, For the one bound to maintain the correct order of prayers, he does not remember a missed prayer during the ritual prayer, and there is sufficient time to perform the missed prayer. So what we're talking about here is Sahibu Tartib. That's the word. Sahibu Tartib is a special person who's never missed more than 5 salahs, one after the other, in their life. So Sahibu Tartib is a person who, like we said, he has never missed 6 salahs, one after the other. Therefore, this person must maintain the order of salah. So for example, this person, and only this person, if they're praying Asr, and during Asr they remember that they haven't prayed the Dhuhr, because he is Sahibu Tartib, he has to maintain the correct order of salahs. His Asr salah is invalid. He has to pray his Dhuhr, then his Asr. And the same applies for any salahs. If he misses Fajr, he's not allowed to pray Dhuhr until he prays Fajr. If he misses Isha, he's not allowed to pray Fajr until he prays his Isha. So everyone is born Sahibu Tartib. But if you miss more than 5 prayers, so 6 prayers, then we say you're not Sahibu Tartib anymore. You don't have to follow the order of prayers. Why? Because imagine someone who's missed a whole year of Salah. How is he going to pray all that whole year of Salah before he prays his Dhuhr today? It's impossible. Therefore, we say how much is easy on a person. 5 salahs is, it's not easy, but it's still able to be done. Anything past 5 salahs is too much. Then we can't tell a person you have to pray 10 days of your qada before you pray your Fajr, for example. That would be too difficult. So Sahibu Tartib. Also, we completely respect whoever is Sahibu Tartib. At the point of the tahrima, right, the opening Allahu Akbar, or any time during the ritual prayer, the women are not parallel to the men in any complete group prayer that they are performing together. So, complete prayer just means a prayer with ruku and sajda. A group prayer means they're all praying the same salah behind the same imam. Okay, so jama'ah. So in jama'ah, the women cannot be parallel to or in front of the men. What happens if they are? All of the men who are in that line, in that saf, and all of the men behind that saf, their salah is invalid. So if a woman prays next to a man during the salah, that man's prayer becomes invalid. So he has to pray again. It doesn't really say it here, but also as if there's nothing in between them, right? If there's nothing in between them, like a curtain or something, then that person's salah, the men's salah, would be invalid. So let's say a single lady prayed in the second saf somehow, okay? The men in the second saf and everyone in the third, fourth, and so forth, all of their prayers are invalid. The people on the first saf, they're fine. Okay? So that's why this is really important. The imam forms an intention to lead the women. Again, this is obligatory. A woman cannot join a man's prayer unless he has made the intention to lead for women, which means this is only for women. So with men, and I know in the Hanafi madhab, our women usually don't have much idea about jama'ah because they're not allowed to do jama'ah amongst the women. But with men, if a man is praying, for example, Asr, and I come into the masjid and I see him praying Asr, I can just stand next to him, obviously slightly behind, and follow him. I make him my imam. Even though he made no intention, he was praying by himself, he made no intention to be the imam, he automatically becomes my imam if I stand next to him and I start praying with him. Okay, so my intention is important. As long as I intend for him to be my imam, then he becomes my imam, whether he wants it or not. Yani. But a woman can't do the same thing. Obviously, this wouldn't happen in a masjid, but for example, at home, if you see your husband praying Maghrib, for example, you can't just stand behind him and start following him unless he's made the intention of leading the salah for you. So if the imam does not make an intention to lead the women, whose salah is invalid? It's the women's salah which is invalid. So the women would have to repeat their prayers, not the imam or the men. Know that from the aforementioned obligations, the obligatory integrals are 4. Again, this is really important. So if you are running a masjid and it has a women's side, then the imam should know if there are women present or not. Okay, we always say you should always make an intention to lead the prayer for women, even if whether you know or you don't know women are there, because they might come later on. But for example, I used to have someone tell me in the masjid when women were there. So that way we made the intention to lead the salah for the women. Know that from the aforementioned obligations, the obligatory integrals are 4. Okay? Namely, standing, recitation of the Quran, bowing, which is ruku, and prostrating, which is sajda. It's 4. Some have opined that the final sitting for the minimum amount of time in which the tashahhud or the at-tahiyyatu may be recited is an obligatory integral. The remaining obligations are conditions. So there's 5 fard of salah, right? If we don't count the takbir as being inside of salah, we say standing, qiraat, so that's reading, ruku', which is bowing, sajda, which is prostration, and the final sitting for the amount of what? Tashahhud, right? So you say at-tahiyyatu lillahi wa salawatu wa tayyibatu, and you carry on reading all the way until ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So that much is fard. The mandatory elements. Now pay attention to this. This is where the idea of sajdatu sahu comes in. Okay? Now the fard, if you do them, your salah is valid. The fard salah is valid. If you don't do them, then you have to repeat the salah. Okay? If you forget, it doesn't matter. If you miss it on purpose, it doesn't matter. You have to repeat the whole salah again. But when it comes to the wajibat, the mandatory elements, then there's a difference between forgetting and not doing it on purpose. If you forget it, right, then you can do sajda sahu, right? Sajda to sahu, which is the forgetfulness sajda. So you do 2 extra sajdas after at-tahiyyatu. You give salam once and you do 2 extra sajdas. The reason for this is because you have forgotten to do something in your salah, so you're making it up with these 2 sajdas. Now, omission of a wajib element does not invalidate the ritual prayer. However, it is mandatory, which is wajib. Okay, so if you miss a wajib, it becomes wajib upon you to repeat the prayer, both during and after the prescribed prayer time has expired. Okay, so if you miss a fard, repeating your salah is fard. If you miss a wajib, repeating your salah is wajib. Okay? When is it wajib to repeat the salah? If the omission was forgetful and the prostration of forgetfulness was not performed. If you don't do sajda to sahu, you have to repeat the prayer. Or the omission was deliberate. You purposefully did not do a wajib. Okay? If this ritual prayer is not repeated, it entails corruption, fisq. Remember what we said? Missing a wajib is tahrim and makruh. The same ruling applies to every prayer performed with an action that is prohibitively disliked. Makruh tahriman, yeah? Remember we said makruh tahriman and wajib are the same thing. they're opposites, but they're the same ruling, which means if you don't do a wajib, it's tahrim and makruh. To not to do a tahrim and makruh is wajib, right? So wajib and tahrim and makruh are the same ruling. So what this means, okay, so from this fatwa, this hukum, this ruling, we understand that if somebody were to recite Quran behind the Imam, remember in the Hanafi fiqh, the Imam's recitation is our recitation. We're not allowed to recite behind the Imam. It's tahrim and makruh. So if you were to accidentally or on purpose recite behind the Imam, either Fatiha or anything, other than Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik dua, then you would have to repeat your prayer. It's that serious. The mandatory elements of the ritual prayer are. Now, what are the mandatory things? So we understand that if we forget, we have to do sajda to sahu. If we don't do sajda to sahu, or we deliberately miss a wajib, right? Then we have to repeat the prayer. If we do it deliberately, sajda to sahu doesn't save the salah. Okay? The mandatory elements of the ritual prayer are recitation of the entire opening chapter, okay, which is Al-Fatiha, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, of the Quran, okay? If one does not fit expiry of the... we've run out of scans. I'll carry on from the book today. Recitation of the entire opening chapter of the Quran if one does not fear expiry of the prescribed time for Fajr. Okay? So, as long as you're not worried about Fajr ending, then you have to recite all of Fatiha. What did we say about Fajr? What's special about Fajr? So, even if you're worried about Dhuhr time ending, you still have to complete the Fatiha. Why? Because after Dhuhr, Asr comes in immediately. After Asr, Maghrib comes in immediately. After Maghrib, Isha comes in immediately. After Isha, Fajr comes in immediately. But after Fajr, there's no Salah. Because after Fajr, there's no Salah, if the time for Fajr expires while you're praying, your prayer is invalid. But during the other Salahs, during Dhuhr, for example, if the time expires while you're praying Dhuhr, you can still complete the prayer and it's valid, as long as you've started before the time expired. Okay? That's why it says, as long as you're not worried about Fajr time ending, you should read all of Fatiha. 2. To add either a short chapter of the Quran, 3 short verses, or 1 longer verse equivalent to 3 short verses to the opening chapter in any 2 units of obligatory prayer comprising 3 or 4 units. Now, I think I'll just take 2 minutes to take these scans real quick and put them up on the screen, because without reading it, these rulings are going to get a bit confusing. So give me 2 minutes while I just take some scans of this. Bismillah. Okay, I'm back now. I took some scans. So, the second wajib was to add either a short chapter of the Quran, 3 short verses, or 1 longer verse equivalent to 3 short verses to the opening chapter in any 2 units of an obligatory prayer comprising 3 or 4 units. Now let's unpack this. So you're in a fard salah which has 3 or 4 units. So it's either Maghrib, Isha, Dhuhr, Asr, basically anything that's not Fajr, right? When you read Fatiha, after Fatiha, you add a surah. We call this Dammu surah in Turkish, which just means to add a surah. It's the Arabic word for it. Either 3 short verses or a long verse equal to 3 short verses. So you can either read Inna A'tainaka al-Kawthar, all of it, or you can read anywhere from the Quran 3 short verses, or you can read 1 long verse, which if you were to compare it to 3 short verses, it's either the same or longer. Okay, you add those. To read that after Fatiha is wajib. Now, to read it in the first 2 raka'ahs of a fard salah again is wajib, right? So, 1 longer verse in any 2 units of an obligatory prayer comprising 3 or 4 units. Now, if it has 3 or 4 units, then reading this extra surah, okay, I'm going to just say Inna A'tainaka al-Kawthar. You guys understand that it just means any 3 or 1 long ayah. So to read Kawthar, for example, in any 2 raka'ahs of the 3 or 4 rak'ahs, okay? That doesn't necessarily mean the first 2, okay? This recitation must specifically be undertaken in the first 2 units of an obligatory prayer. It adds this afterwards, okay? So it's an extra mandatory step. Okay, so reciting this Quran is wajib. Reciting it in the first 2 raka'ahs is another wajib. Okay, that's why it says it twice here. So it says in any 2 units is wajib. In the first 2 units, another wajib. Okay. This recitation must be performed in each unit of the witr and supererogatory prayer, which means the nafila prayers and the witr prayers. This after Fatiha, you need to read a surah in every single raka'ah. Okay? So even if it's 4 raka'ahs, you don't just read a surah, you don't just read Kawthar after Fatiha in the first 2, you also read it after the 3rd and 4th, if you get what I'm saying. 3, the opening chapter, so the Fatiha, must be recited before what we just said, Kawthar, okay? Similarly, one must not repeat the opening chapter in one of the first 2 units. Okay, you can't read Fatiha twice before reciting a chapter of the Quran. You can't read Fatiha twice. If you do, if it's by accident, you have to do the sajda. Okay, if you do it on purpose, you have to repeat the salah. Observing the correct order between the 2 prostrations. That is to perform the second prostration in each unit of prayer before moving to another act of the prayer. Which means, basically what it's saying here, the correct order between the 2 prostrations is you do the first sajda and you do the second sajda immediately after the first sajda. So, if you forget to do the second sajda after the first sajda and you get up, okay, you need to do that second sajda later on. Okay, you need to add it later on. And you need to do the sajda of sahu, right? The forgetfulness prostration. Obviously because of this wajib here, which means you didn't observe the correct order, but you still did it. So the fard is valid. You've done the fard, but you've missed a wajib. 5, to perform the recitation of the Quran before ruku', okay, before bowing. You read the Quran and then you bow. During prostration, in addition to the forehead, to also place the hard part of the nose, which just means you push down your nose a bit when you do sajda. So instead of just like basically hovering your nose, you push it down a bit in sajda. The prostration is upon a majority of the forehead, okay? So we don't do sajda on a tiny area, okay? most of our forehead should be on the ground. Both hands and knees are placed on the ground during prostration. All of these are wajib. Okay? Both hands and knees are placed on the ground during prostration. To be motionless for the length of time it takes to utter one tasbih, which is Subhanallah. Okay? During ruku, sajda, and after rising from them both. Okay? So when you do ruku, you should stop for at least one Subhanallah. And then when you get up, you should stop motionless for at least one Subhanallah. Okay? And then you go into sajda, you stop for one Subhanallah. You get up from sajda, again, you stop for one Subhanallah. These are all wajib. If you pray too fast on purpose, then your salah is invalid. You have to repeat the salah. If you do it too quickly by accident, then you must do the forgetfulness sajda. The first sitting is wajib. Remember, we said the last sitting is fard. Okay? The first sitting is wajib for the minimum amount of time in which the tashahhud may be recited. Also, one should not remain sitting after completing the reciting of the tashahhud. You have to be fast in prayer. Inside salah, you should always be doing something. Okay? You cannot just stand blankly or sit blankly in salah. Okay? One should not remain sitting after completing the reciting of the tashahhud. Sitting for the time it takes to utter Allahumma salli ala Muhammad or more nullifies this mandatory element. You've missed a wajib. Okay? So if you sit for too long after at-tahiyyatu in the first sitting, then you must do the sajda of forgetfulness. The sitting that follows the prostration of forgetfulness, okay, so once you do the two sajdas of forgetfulness, you have to do at-tahiyyatu again. So you need to do the sitting again. That sitting is mandatory, even though technically it's the last sitting. The entire tashahhud, whichever prescribed formula it may be, okay, the entire tashahhud, whichever prescribed formula it may be, which means there are different hadith on how the at-tahiyyatu is supposed to be read, but it doesn't matter, whichever one you pick, okay, in the first and final sitting must be read, okay? It's wajib to read at-tahiyyatu. So, sitting for long enough to read at-tahiyyatu in the first sitting is wajib. To read at-tahiyyatu is another wajib, okay? However, the sunnah is the tashahhud narrated by Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu, okay? Which is the one that most of us know anyways. To utter as-salam without alaykum on both sides. Okay, so this doesn't mean you're not supposed to say alaykum. This means the salam word is wajib. So if you forget to say alaykum, that's fine. As long as you said as-salam, you've done the wajib, okay? But obviously, what are you supposed to say? As-salamu alaykum wa rahmatullah, as-salamu alaykum wa rahmatullah. Okay, so saying as-salam is wajib. Reciting on both sides is wajib. Reciting the supplication of the witr prayer, the qunut, that may be in the form of any supplication. What does this mean? That means in the witr prayer, after the third raka'ah, when you do the extra takbir, okay, to recite any dua is wajib. To recite the qunut dua is sunnah, okay, but you have to recite a dua. So that could be Rabbana ighfirli, that could be Rabbana atina, that could be any dua which is in Arabic and is what we say a prophetic dua, which means you're not asking for money and for wealth and for a car. You're asking for forgiveness and for Jannah and for the pleasure of Allah. These sort of du'as need to be made. Specifically using the words Allahu Akbar to open all prayers. Okay? So saying Allahu Akbar, saying Allahu is fard, Akbar is wajib. Technically, this book doesn't go into too much detail, but in the other books it says any praise would work here. Obviously, don't do that. Don't make things complicated for yourself, but just for the sake of knowledge, you can say Allahu Akbar. You can say, for example, Allahu Qadir. which means Allah is powerful, you can say Allahu. I can't think of one right now, but Allahu Akbar, Allahu Qadir, anything that any one of his names which implies being big and powerful. So you can use those also, but obviously just say Allahu Akbar. The 6 additional takbirs of the 2 Eid prayers. Okay, when we're praying Eid prayer, we have the extra takbirs, 3 in the first rakat, 3 in the second rakat, so there's 6 extra takbirs. They're all wajib. And similarly, each takbir is a separate mandatory element. So what does this mean? If the imam forgets and he goes into ruku, he's not allowed to get up back from ruku to do them, okay? Because it's only a wajib. You don't leave a fard to repeat a wajib. We just count it as, okay, he's forgotten. So the imam must at the end do the forgetfulness sajda. The takbir for moving into the bowing position during the second unit of the 2 Eid prayers. Now, we said the 6 additional takbirs, but just for Eid prayer, the takbir for moving into ruku in the second unit of the Eid prayer. Okay, why? Because this takbir comes immediately after the extra takbirs. So this also becomes a wajib. Because in the Eid prayer, in the second rak'ah, you do 3 extra takbirs, and then with the 4th takbir, you go into ruku. This 4th takbir is wajib because it comes immediately after these 3 extra takbirs. But in other salahs, it's not a wajib, okay? For the recitation of the imam of a congregational prayer to be audible during the Fajr prayer, the first 2 units of Maghrib and Isha. So, you know the loud prayers, which are the prayers prayed at night time. So during Fajr, Maghrib and Isha. These ones are loud prayers, and the imam must, it's a mandatory, to recite loud. He doesn't have the option of reciting quietly. Even if it's a qada prayer, a make-up prayer. The Friday prayer must be read loud. The 2 Eid prayers must be read loud. Taraweeh, mandatory to be read loud, okay? And the Witr prayer in Ramadan, mandatory to be prayed loudly in all rak'ats, so even after the sitting in the 3rd rak'ah. The same applies for the Witr prayer outside Ramadan, okay? If you were to pray it in a congregation and people are not specifically invited for this reason, because if you invite people to Witr prayer, the Hanafi madhab says that's makruh. It's like you're making up a 6th prayer. If nafila prayers are performed during the night in a congregation, the recitation must be allowed. Okay? So any prayer prayed at night time, okay, during the night, yeah, it must be loud. If you pray it during the day, then it must be quiet. The recitation must not be audible to others during Dhuhr, Asr, and the 3rd unit of Maghrib, and the final 2 units of Isha. Okay? The eclipse prayer and the drought prayer. All of these prayers are quiet prayers. Obviously, with the fard, the first 2 rak'ahs are loud, the last 2 rak'ahs are quiet. The one praying a current or make-up prayer alone, the one performing nafila prayers during the night, and the one who misses 1 unit of the Friday prayer and then stands to make it up may opt to recite aloud. So you don't have to be the imam of a jama'ah to read out loud. You can read out loud while praying by yourself if obviously you're praying one of the loud salahs, the nighttime salahs, or the nighttime nafila, or you missed a raka'ah for Friday. Because Friday prayer itself is a loud prayer. So when you're making it up, you can read out loud. Obviously, don't do this. You can, but don't do it. Other mandatory elements include to perform every mandatory and obligatory element in its designated place. So, what does that mean? If what you're doing is fard, or what you're doing is wajib, then you must do it in the correct place. Okay? For example, the takbir of tahrim. It's a fard, yeah? It must be done in its place, which is standing, okay? The recitation is what? Fard. It must be done where? Standing, okay? You can't do you can't read the Quran in ruku. You can't read the Quran in sajda. Okay, if you do, like we said, the obligation might be fulfilled, but the mandatory is not fulfilled. The wajib is not fulfilled. So you might have done the fard, but you haven't done the wajib. Therefore, you need to pray again. Or you need to do the sajda of sahu if it was unintentional. B, not to repeat the bowing or to prostrate 3 times. So you can't do ruku twice and you can't do sajda 3 times. If you do these by accident, what is it? You have to do the sajda, the forgetfulness sajda. Not to sit in the first or third units. Okay, we only sit in the even number ones. So 2, 4, 6, 8. We don't sit in 1, 3, 5, 7, and so on. If you do, if you sit there long enough to say Subhanallah, okay, then you must do the forgetfulness sajda. Not to add anything that separates 2 consecutive obligatory elements. For example, if you're going from the qiraat to ruku, or you're going from ruku to sajda, or whatever, same with wajib and fard. You're not supposed to add anything in between. You're not supposed to delay your second fard. For example, if I'm standing and I'm going to go into ruku, I've just finished recitation of the Quran, okay, and I'm about to go into ruku, and I decide that I'm going to do something else. I'm going to do an sajda and then get up and then do the ruku or whatever. This is all messing up the wajib, okay? If one omits to recite a chapter of the Quran in, for example, one of the first 2 units of Maghrib, or both the first 2 units of Isha, he recites a chapter aloud with the opening chapter in the final 2 units. So, if you read Fatiha in Isha, the first 2 rak'ahs, but you don't read a surah after it, then you must read a surah after the Fatiha in the 3rd and 4th rak'ahs. Okay? So you forgot to recite, for example, normally, let's say you recite Qul Huwallahu Ahad or Inna A'atayna, you recite Kawthar, okay? So let's say in the first rak'ah of Isha, you read Fatiha, but you forgot to read Inna A'atayna and you went into ruku. This might happen if you're not paying attention. Then you missed how many surahs? You missed 1 surah. Then what you must do is, obviously you still need to recite in the 2nd rak'ah, but in the 3rd rak'ah, normally you would just do the Fatiha and go into ruku. But because you need to make up 1 surah, after Fatiha you recite, for example, Inna A'atayna or Qul Huwallahu Ahad, and then you go into ruku. So you have to make it up. So, but for Isha, you can miss it twice. For Maghrib, you can only miss it once. Why? Because Maghrib only has 3 rak'ahs. If you miss it twice, then you can't make up 2. If one forgetfully omits the opening chapter in the first 2 units, okay, let's say instead of forgetting the surah after Fatiha, he completely forgot Fatiha. It is not repeated twice in 1 unit in the final 2 units. Okay, rather one prostrates for forgetfulness. So if you forget to recite Fatiha, and on the 3rd rakat, you're not allowed to read Fatiha twice, because you have to read Fatiha anyways on the 3rd rak'ah, and then you can't say, okay, I've recited Fatiha, now let me recite a Fatiha again for the one I missed. You can't do that. Remember, we said Fatiha is never recited twice. So because Fatiha is never recited twice, your only option is to do the forgetfulness sajda. And there ends our wajibs. So these are the important things to keep in mind. If you want to keep these in your mind, the easiest way is remember the order of salah. Messing up the order of salah would automatically entail that you need to do a forgetfulness sajda. Okay? If you remember, a lot of the wajibs that we just read were basically saying you have to do this before you do this, or after you do this. So the order of salah, we all know the order of salah. Now, if you mess up the order of salah, for example, you do qiraat in ruku, you start reciting Quran in ruku, or you did 3 sajdas instead of 2, or you messed up your Fatiha, you forgot to read Fatiha, or you forgot to read something after Fatiha. All of these necessitate what? The sajda of forgetfulness. So, one, not mixing up the order. Second, not delaying a fard or a wajib. Okay, so for example, after the first sitting, you finished Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh, and then you just sat around. Or you mistakenly went on to read Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim. And then you remembered, oh wait, it's the first sitting. You must now do a forgetfulness sajda at the end of salah. So one, mixing up the order of salah. Two, adding something which shouldn't have been there, so delaying the salah, or just standing emptily, right? So you've read your Fatiha, and then you're thinking about what you should read after Fatiha. If this emptiness, let's say, lasts for 3 subhanallahs, okay, subhanallah, 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 and you still haven't started reading, then you need to do the sajda of forgetfulness. If it was done on purpose, so you just decided to stay quiet for no reason, obviously then we would say you've missed the wajib on purpose, and the forgetfulness sajda doesn't save you. That's only for forgetfulness. If you do it on purpose, that's a problem. You have to repeat the prayer. Okay, and don't forget with the fard salah, Fatiha must be read. Fatiha and an extra surah must be read in the first 2 rak'ahs, and in the 3rd and 4th rak'ah, you can only read Fatiha. But if you miss the extra surah, you forget to read the extra surah in the first 2 rak'ahs, then you can read them in the 3rd and 4th rak'ah, and that would save your salah. Okay, we'll end here inshallah, just so that we don't leave the sunnahs midway. After the fard and the wajib comes the sunnah, and then the adab of salah. So inshallah, we'll end here. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين